Hello, hello, and welcome to Aldsidu. Aldsidu is the old Saxon word that means old ways or old customs. Today we're going to discuss human sacrifice and pre-Christian heathenry. Sadly, I feel like I always have to make disclaimers. I do not believe that human sacrifice should be done in today's world. I've been accused that just because I practice reconstructing the old ways for today, that this means I must actually sacrifice humans. I assure you I do not, and I would never do such a thing. I guess that sadly there's a lot of disdain for old ways heathens. In Aldsidu, we only reconstruct the holy days, the timing of them, their dating, their meaning, the rituals involved with them, symbol and bloat. And of course, we reconstruct symbol and bloat for the non-holidays as well. And we look at weddings and funerals and other ceremonies like teething ceremonies mentioned in the Germanic literature. We reconstruct those for today. We do not reconstruct anything like human sacrifice. And also, as I'm about to discuss, you know, movies and Christians portrayed heathens as sacrificing their own children to the gods as opposed to criminals or prisoners of war, which were hands down the overwhelming majority of them. The Christian and Muslim sources on the heathens paint them in as negative a light as possible. Human sacrifice in heathenry was really acts of war. When you win a war, you don't have war imprisonment camps. It was impractical in pre-Christian heathen times to do that. The manpower it took to keep prisoners of war would not have worked, and Geneva Conventions and modern rules of warfare, which really aren't even followed into the modern world to begin with, but rules, so to speak, of engagement or rules of war in our modern world, not only were they not followed today, but they certainly weren't followed in old times. I'm not suggesting that the European or American armies or whatever today should sacrifice prisoner of wars to Germanic gods, so please don't take this the wrong way. But we are going to look at human sacrifice in pre-Christian heathenry today. As a historical look, absolutely not a practice for today. Any bad comments will be deleted. Bigots get banned and troublemakers get banned. So please, let's behave well, let's behave honorably the way our heathen ancestors would have in the comments. So, the Germanic tribes who fought with Arminius against the Romans in the 1st century, they certainly sacrificed prisoners of war. They hung them on trees as Woden hung himself on a tree with rope, and Woden speared himself, or Odin speared himself with rope. So this drawing that you see on the left side of the screen is just an artist rendition of the tribes who would eventually become the Saxons. The Cherusker, the Marsi, the Fossi, the Angrivari, and others who sacrificed Romans to the Germanic war god Woden, or Odin, after Arminius's defeat of 3 Roman legions of 22,000 Roman troops, as described by 1st century Roman historian Tacitus. The Roman sources claim these Proto-Saxon tribes, the tribes that would win the Saxon Confederation, sacrificed the Roman soldiers on trees with rocks being used as altars, or hergs. So that is a historical event that did happen. These tribes that became the Saxons did not have kings. They actually ended up killing Arminius because he wanted to be a Kaiser, Caesar, king. And these tribes believed in thingdom, not dictatordom, or later Christian definition of a king or Kaiser, so to speak. The Saxons did not have kings, and I understand some English did move to England, but Old Saxons did not have kings. It was absolutely against. Even Bede, the English historian, says the Saxons did not have kings. So that's what happened. These tribes first followed Arminius, they defeated the Romans, and later they killed Arminius for trying to be a Caesar to them. So even Old English studies have scholars that state that there's no mention of human sacrifice amongst the Old English heathens. Marilyn Dunn and David Wilson in particular have stated this in their books. I have them on my screen. Remember, though, the absence in written sources doesn't necessarily prove absence in history. While there are no Anglo-Saxon mentions of human sacrifice, we do have some continental Saxon references to human sacrifice. We have over 300 Old English poems. We have only 21 Old Saxon poems to survive, but we also have many writings in Latin, like the laws forced upon the newly conquered Saxons, the Lex Saxonum, that outlawed their heathenry. So that's very important for understanding what practices were outlawed, describe their heathenry. We also have the Royal Frankish Annals, who describe the Saxons and their savagery in the sources. So we do have some continental Saxon references to Saxon human sacrifice. Now, Sidonius is the first to mention human sacrifice among the Saxons. Sidonius is a saint who died in 489 AD or CE of the Common Era. Sidonius's 9 books of letters is, according to one important Saxon scholar, Dr. Eric Goldberg, the most single important surviving author from 5th century Gaul. So you can see where I pulled that quote from Dr. Eric J. Goldberg. Eric Goldberg's doctoral thesis, The Saxons to Linga Reconsidered, amazing. Absolutely pay for that. Get it through JSTOR. Buy it. Absolute must. He is not paying me to advertise that. That is my personal opinion. Eric Goldberg, amazing scholar on the Saxons. Now, some scholars who look at Sidonius' mention of the Saxons and human sacrifice, some scholars accept or dismiss his mention of the Saxons, mainly based on how they view the Latin in which Sidonius wrote. So let's take a look at what Sidonius recorded about the Saxons and human sacrifice, and note on the next slide that the Latin words are in parentheses. So Sidonius said, around 480 or so, that when the Saxons prepare to set out from their homeland, the Latin word is patriam, their custom, mos, dictates that they sacrifice 1/10 of their prisoners. The victims are chosen by lot and killed by water or crucifixion. And I have the Latin words there in parentheses. Now, I agree with modern scholars that the old Saxons did not know what crucifixion was. The scholars are absolutely right. There's no arguing it, because in the 9th century, when the Saxons became Christian, we have these Frankish writings explaining to the Saxons what crucifixion was, which implies extremely strongly that the Saxons did not nail people to trees. But we do have references, writings, that the Saxons hung people from trees and speared them like Woden did to himself. That is absolutely what the Saxons knew. They did not nail people to trees, and they certainly didn't give a flying fuck, excuse my French, about 3 nails to a crucifix or a cross beam roped around a tree or whatever. They understood their form of killing prisoners of war. Now, the word excruciating comes from the word crucifixion, which comes from the Latin word for cross. So I do not believe that the Saxons practiced crucifixion, and I don't believe that they necessarily drowned their victims, as Sidonius said. What's also important to note is, in the 5th century, the Romans were already calling all the Germanic tribes Saxons, so we don't know if Sidonius was actually talking to the Saxons or the Frisians or the Alemanni, or what specific tribe he was talking about, or if he was talking about multiple tribes. It's very sad that the English later called all Northmen Danes, so we couldn't tell if they were Frisians or Swedes or Norwegians or Danes. And the Roman use of calling all the Germanic people Saxon is quite confusing and doesn't help us to understand which Germanic tribe they're talking about, as the Saxons are really one specific Germanic tribe. But nonetheless, what I like about this, before I leave this quote, it implies that the Saxons didn't kill their own people, that they chose prisoners of war, and they sacrificed 1/10 of their prisoners. Now, in terms of the Latin, again, it's very simple. I've kind of already mentioned this. The archaeological evidence shows that we had bog sacrifices. We already have, I've mentioned the Old Saxon Hellion. It had to explain what crucifixion was to the Saxons. So this means that Sidonius is absolutely not talking about the Saxons, most likely. Sidonius' statement may just refer to pirates sailing the North Sea, because, the Romans used the word Saxon to mean pirate. The Saxons did lose a 33-year war of independence against Charlemagne in the 9th century. They lost. The war came to a close in 804. The Saxons rebelled again in the years 841 through 843, and there was another Saxon uprising that was crushed in the 1070s. So the Saxons did not like being Christians, but eventually they became full-hearted Christians. The Saxons in Saxony were heathens far longer than the English were. The English became Christians in 655 when England was fully Christianized with the defeat of Penda. The Saxons certainly wanted to remain heathen and free from foreign Frankish Christian rule. But it's very important to understand that the Franks wrote the Lex Saxonum. That means the laws of the Saxons. The laws that the Franks forbid showed the Saxon heathenry, because, the Lex Saxonum was forbidding heathenry, and it gives a long list of heathen customs that are being condemned. So let's look at the Lex Saxonum. They were first written in 782. They were rewritten a few times, and their final form is 797 CE or AD. And one of these laws in the Lex Saxonum did mention human sacrifice. So sentence 9 or commandment 9 of the Lex Saxonum, which was the law code forced on the Saxons in 797 AD. These are the Saxons in Saxony, of course. I'm not talking about Anglo-Saxons or English. When I refer to the Anglo-Saxons, I will call them English. When I refer to the Saxons, I will call them Saxons. But nonetheless, the Lex Saxonum states, if anyone shall have sacrificed a man to the devil, and after the manner of the pagans shall have presented him as a victim to demons, let him be punished by death. Now, to me, this is a very interesting statement. One, it does imply that the Saxons did some form of human sacrifice. But it also implies to me that the Christians believed that the Saxon gods existed. They just called them demons. So the Christians absolutely feared the Saxon gods. They were demons, and they were scared to death of them. Hence, we have witch hunts and things like that in history where they're afraid of, heathens bringing up evil spirits or demons and bringing them into the church. So, again, the devil and demons are what Christians called heathen gods. But I wanted to make a side note that, when you read the Lex Saxonum, bloat is never mentioned. Animal sacrifice is never mentioned. And I really believe that this is a clue to me that bloat in heathenry was, taking an animal, slicing its artery, putting the blood in a bloat bowl, sharing the blood with the gods, eating the animal as food, and using the skins for clothing. And this is why the Franks, who were Christians, didn't condemn that, because they probably saw bloat not as a pagan ceremony, but as, killing an animal for skins and killing an animal for food. They didn't condemn the Saxons for eating. And I think that that's very important, that I haven't seen other scholars point out, but I think it's a very interesting point. Again, it's very interesting that the Christians did not accuse the Saxons of doing any animal sacrifice, nor did they forbid it anywhere in the Lex Saxonum or any Saxon capitulary. They were very adamant on listing the things they didn't want the Saxons doing, and they never listed animal sacrifice. Interesting. And please note as well, any Christians complaining that heathens did human sacrifice should stop for a minute and think, because Jesus himself, the center of Christian religion, is a human sacrifice, or some form of deicide or suicide in some bizarre or strange way, I guess, if you want to think about it. Did Jesus commit suicide by the all-powerful God handing himself over and not putting up a fight, the peaceful death? Was it a deicide? Was Jesus God, or was he a human? Did Jesus even exist? I think the answer is no. I don't think a human name. I'm sure plenty of humans have existed with the name Yeshua, the Hebrew name in the first century, but did the Jesus that we know of as Jesus today exist? I think the answer is no. But that's not the point of this video, so moving on. I think the Saxon sources that we have implied that the Saxons did perform human sacrifice, but I don't think that they sacrificed their own people to the gods. The sources seem to imply that they did because people interpret them that way. Because they outlaw human sacrifice, it doesn't say the who. It doesn't say stop sacrificing your children. It doesn't say stop sacrificing prisoners of war. It says stop sacrificing humans to demons. I kind of side with Sidonius. I don't believe any of the Germanic tribes would have killed their own unless they were criminals or they were prisoners of war. I understand, because we have genealogies. The Saxons felt they were descended from Sasnoth. The word Saxon is Sas. The word Saxons is Sason. So the Saxons certainly felt they were descended from Sasnoth. So I don't believe that they would sacrifice their own Sasan descendants to the god Sasnoth. I bet they would find that sacrilege. You don't. If you believe you're descendant from Sasnoth, why would you sacrifice one of Sasnoth's offspring to Sasnoth? I mean, if I'm honored generations after my death by my progeny, I don't want them sacrificing my great-great-great-grandchildren to me. I would find that sacrilege. I do believe that prisoners of war were the sacrifice, and there's many examples of this in the Old Saxon Hellion, where men are sacrificed on trees with rope. They were hung on trees, as Woden was hung on a tree and pierced with a spear, Woden's weapon. The Old Saxon Hellion was written in 830 AD. The Lex Saxonum was written in 797. When Christ is crucified in the Old Saxon Hellion poem, he is both nailed to a cross and hung on a tree with rope, because the Saxons did not understand Roman crucifixion, and the Hellion goes at great lengths to explain what that is. So a first-time Saxon gospel-hearing heathen would have no idea what crucifixion was unless it was explained to them. So that's why in Saxon writings you have hung on a rope, nailed to a tree, which is a sentence that doesn't make much sense, but now that you understand that they're trying to explain what crucifixion was to people that were new to the Christian story, that's why. So Saxon prisoners, the Saxons definitely hung prisoners of war on rope with trees. They killed the Proto-Saxon tribes, the tribes that would become the Saxons under Arminius's leadership, did nail Roman soldiers to trees and hang them on trees with rope to honor Odin. This is recorded in the sources, and it did happen. Now, I want to show some Old Saxon passages. There's 21 Old Saxon poems that survive, but 80% of the total word and verse and sentence surviving literature is from one of the 21 poems. The Old Saxon Hellion is so big, it's bigger than 3 Gospels. It's 2.5 times the size, almost 3 times the size of Beowulf. It's so big compared to all the other 20 Saxon heathen poems I quote a lot. It is the main Old Saxon source. But, as the Old Saxon Hellion says in verse 5345 through 5347, I have the authority to kill you with spear's point or kill you on a cross. Obviously, the spear's point would be understood very clearly to Saxon heathens. Kill on a cross would be like, what the hell is that? Giving some more passages from the lore on human sacrifice. I'm going to do that. Let's pull in some pan-Germanic passages. Let's pull in one of the sagas, the Arabia Saga. The circle where the court used to sentence people to be sacrificed can still be seen, with Thor's stone inside it on which the victims' backs were broken. You can still see the blood on the stone. So we do have other Norse, Scandinavian, Icelandic sources that do claim heathens did human sacrifice. And they pretty much always seem to say they're criminals or prisoners of war. So we can give more examples. the heathens called on the gods to prevent the spread of Christianity through the land with human sacrifice, like we see in chapter 12 of the Christny Saga. Very important passage, so a good passage to look up. We see Adam of Bremen, who wrote his famous passage in his book Gesta in the 11th century. He said, "Is the custom wherever every 9 years for a common bloat of all the provinces of Sweden to be held at Uppsala. Kings and commoners, one and all, send their gifts to Uppsala, and what is crueler than any punishment, even those who have accepted Christianity have to buy immunity from these ceremonies." So basically, Adam of Bremen says all Swedes must go, but if you became Christian, you have to pay shield to get out of it. Of course, he's going to say buy immunity because he's a Christian. He doesn't know heathen practice. But the bloat is as follows: of every living creature they offered 9 a head. With the blood of those it is custom to placate the gods, but their bodies are hanged in a grove which is near the temple. So holy is the grove to the heathens that each tree in it is presumed to be divine by reason of the victim's death and putrefaction. There are also dogs and horses hung along with the men. One of the Christians told me that he had seen 72 bodies of various kinds hanging there, but the incantations which are usually sung at this kind of sacrifice are various and disgraceful, so I have nothing better to say about them. My one question is how did a Christian see all that? Because wouldn't the Christians buy their way out of it? And, there's this Christian that saw it, and he tells Adam of Bremen in old Saxon lands, which is a little ways from Uppsala. So there's a lot of scholastic scrutiny of the Adam of Bremen passage. Because, the Christians and the Muslims seem to imply that the heathens did do human sacrifice, but when you get down to the sources that are more heathen and a little less monotheistic, they seem to imply that a bloat is sharing the blood with the gods. The idea of bloat hanging animals on trees, we really don't see in the sagas, but we see it when Adam of Bremen or Ibn Fadlan talks about them, a Muslim or a Christian bishop. I personally think Adam of Bremen probably heard this from Thietmar of Merseburg. I'm not saying that Thietmar of Merseburg crossed paths with Adam of Bremen, because I don't think their lives crossed paths. They lived in different time periods. But, these authors borrowed from other sources, because Thietmar of Merseburg said that in his Chronicon that the Danes offered to their gods 99 people with horses and dogs, hens and hawks. I think Adam of Bremen may have used that passage and kind of used the numbering in a similar way. I guess we don't know for sure, but when Christian monks or Muslims write about heathens, how should we take them today? Because they're obviously hostile sources to heathens. So the Ying Linga Saga has an interesting passage. Damold took the heritage after his father Visper and ruled over the land, as in the time there was great famine and distress. The Swedes made great bloats, or great offerings of bloats at Uppsala, and in the autumn and Haust, which would be winter nights, they bloated oxen, but the succeeding season was not improved upon. So then the following Haust, they sacrificed men. But that year was even worse. So then the third Haust, or Haust Manuther, we translated autumn today, but it really means harvest moon. When they offered their bloats, a great multitude of Swedes came to Uppsala, and now the chiefs held consultations with each other, and they all agreed that times of scarcity were an account of their king Damold. So they resolved to offer him for good seasons and to assault and kill him and sprinkle the stall of the gods with his blood, and they did so. So, we do see some passages, but I tend to wonder how Christianized and how fantasized some of these accounts get. But nonetheless, I do believe human sacrifice happened. I do believe that they were mainly of prisoners of war and of criminals. We have bog sacrifice evidence, though oddly we don't have literary evidence of bog sacrifice, unless you count Sidonius's drowning that I mentioned. Maybe those were the bog bodies. But the literary evidence of bog bodies outside of Sidonius, I really don't know. But hopefully you found this video interesting, so visit us on the Facebook group Aldsidu Saxon Heathenry. Visit our website, aldsidu.com, and see all our free blog articles at aldsidu.com/blog. Please like and subscribe. Woden would, I'm joking, but Woden would love for you to subscribe. I shouldn't speak for the gods, but in all seriousness, I would appreciate your support by subscribing and watching my videos, please. I'm almost to the 4,000 hour mark, which will get me monetized. I'm almost there, so please watch my videos, get me over the hump, and I would appreciate it. All my books will remain for free, but I'm getting to the point where YouTube might hit my pocketbook. So thank you very much. Like and subscribe, and talk to you.